A young millionaire was skeptical about love. Due to a strategic agreement, he agreed to an arranged marriage. The bride always walked around wearing a veil. When she finally revealed her face at the party, everyone was surprised. Before hearing this thrilling story, remember to subscribe to the channel. Ethan Harrison Montgomery gazed at the city of Chicago through the windows of his office on the top floor of the Montgomery Enterprises building. At 32, he led one of the largest business conglomerates in the country, but at that specific moment, he felt like a teenager about to be scolded by his parents. "You need to get married, Ethan." The voice of his father, Richard Montgomery, echoed through the room. The Anderson family has proposed a union that would benefit both families. Their daughter Eleanor is of the appropriate age and... "Dad, please," Ethan interrupted, swiveling his chair to face the patriarch. "It's 2025, not the 19th century. Arranged marriages?" Richard adjusted his tie, a gesture he always made when about to deliver an ultimatum. "It's not just an arranged marriage, son. It's a strategic alliance. The Andersons have connections we need to expand our business overseas. Besides," he paused significantly, "the situation with the investors is more delicate than you realize." Ethan frowned. He knew some recent projects hadn't delivered the expected results, but he hadn't imagined the situation could be so critical that his father would suggest marriage as a solution. "And this Eleanor, what do we know about her?" Graduated in business administration and international law, lived in Europe for a few years, returned to the US about 6 months ago. Richard consulted his tablet. "Oh, and there's a peculiar detail. She wears a veil." "A veil?" Ethan raised his eyebrows. "What do you mean?" "Apparently, it's a personal choice of hers. The Andersons don't go into details about it, and it would be impolite to ask." Ethan let out a dry laugh. "So, you want me to marry a woman who doesn't even show her face? That's ridiculous." "What's ridiculous is seeing generations of work being threatened because of your skepticism toward commitment," Richard retorted, his voice taking on a harsher tone. "You've had your chances to find someone on your own. How many failed relationships in recent years? And always for the same reason: your inability to get emotionally involved." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. It was true that his past relationships had been superficial, based more on appearances and convenience than real connections. But that was his choice, wasn't it? "What if I refuse?" Richard stood up, adjusting his impeccable suit. "Then we'll have to consider other options for the company's presidency. Your sister Bianca has always shown more maturity in her decisions." The mention of his younger sister taking his place made Ethan clench his fists involuntarily. Not that he didn't trust Bianca's abilities, but that company was his life. He had dedicated every minute of the last 10 years to keeping it at the top. "How much time do I have to think?" "The Andersons expect an answer by the end of the week. The introductory dinner is set for Saturday." Ethan turned back to the window, watching the sunset that painted the Chicago sky with shades of orange and pink. His mind quickly calculated the possibilities, as it did with all business matters. "All right," he finally replied, his voice steady. "I'll meet her, but I promise nothing beyond that." Richard smiled, satisfied. "Great, I'll send the dinner details to your assistant." He walked to the door but stopped before leaving. "Son, sometimes the best things in life come wrapped in unexpected ways." Alone in the office, Ethan allowed himself a moment of reflection. His life had always been guided by numbers, strategies, and results. Love? It was just a social construct, an excuse people used to justify irrational decisions. He picked up his phone and quickly typed in Eleanor Anderson's name. Social media revealed little: private profiles and a few old photos, all from before her return to the US. In none of all them was there any sign of the veil. His assistant, Megan, entered the room with a folder. "Your father asked me to deliver the dossier on the Anderson family." Ethan flipped through the documents distractedly. Impressive numbers, important political connections, promising international projects. Everything seemed too perfect. "Megan, schedule a meeting with our investigation team for early tomorrow. I want to know everything about the Andersons, especially about Eleanor." "Yes, sir." Anything else? Not for now. He hesitated. Actually, yes. Look up some references. About EU veils. Why would someone choose to wear one constantly? Megan nodded, taking notes. It could be for various reasons, cultural, religious, personal, or to hide something. Ethan added, more to himself than to his assistant. When he was alone again, he allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. Was he really considering an arranged marriage? Him, who had always mocked traditions and social conventions? But as he watched the now dark Chicago sky, dotted with the lights of the buildings, an involuntary curiosity began to grow in his chest. Who was this mysterious woman who chose to hide behind a veil? And why, despite all his skepticism, did he find himself eager to find out? He grabbed his folder and coat, deciding he needed a walk to clear his mind. In the elevator, his reflection. In the mirror stared back at him with an expression he didn't recognize, a mix of resignation and, surprisingly, anticipation. "You're going crazy, Montgomery," he murmured to himself. But as he crossed the building's lobby, he couldn't stop, thinking about the dinner on Saturday and the mysterious woman who might completely change the course of his life. The Ritz sparkled like a jewel in the Chicago night. Ethan adjusted his tie for the 10th time as the valet parked his Porsche. Nervousness was something new for him. Normally, he dominated any social situation with the same precision he used in business meetings. "Good evening, sir." "Montgomery," the maitre d' greeted him with a discreet bow. "Your family is already waiting in the private room." As he walked down the elegant hallway, Ethan tried to organize his thoughts. The investigation into the Andersons had revealed interesting information. A traditional family with roots in Portugal, solid businesses in renewable energy, and an impeccable reputation in the international market. About Eleanor, however, the information was surprisingly scarce. Upon entering the reserved room, the first thing he noticed was the veil. Eleanor was seated between her parents, wearing an elegant navy blue dress and a delicate veil of the same color that fell softly, covering her face but allowing only the outline of her lips to be seen. The fabric was thin enough for her to see through it, but opaque enough to keep her face a mystery. "Ethan, what a pleasure to finally meet you." Anthony Anderson, Eleanor's father, stood up to greet him. He was a tall man with graying hair and a soft Portuguese accent. "Eleanor, darling, this is Ethan Montgomery." Eleanor stood up with a grace that surprised him. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ethan." Her voice was melodious, with a slight European accent. She extended her hand toward him, and he noticed her fingers were long and delicate, with perfectly manicured nails in a nude shade. "The pleasure is mine," he replied automatically, surprised by the firmness of her handshake. The dinner began with the usual pleasantries, conversations about the weather, the city, the latest market trends. Ethan discreetly observed Eleanor, noticing how she moved with ease despite the veil, how she participated in conversations with insightful comments about the global economy. "Eleanor has just implemented a revolutionary solar energy project in Portugal," commented Marianne Anderson, her mother with evident pride. "It was just a small contribution," Eleanor replied modestly. "In fact, I was studying some of Montgomery Enterprises' initiatives in that area. Your solar farm project in the Northeast is fascinating, Ethan." He was surprised by her knowledge of his business. "You researched our company?" "Naturally," she replied with a slight smile visible under the veil. "Just as I'm sure you investigated my family." Her frankness caught him off guard, making him almost choke on his wine. Their parents exchanged amused glances. "Perhaps we could take a walk through the restaurant's garden," Eleanor suggested suddenly. "The evening air should be pleasant." Before anyone could protest, she was already on her feet. Ethan followed, her intrigued by her initiative. In the garden illuminated by soft lanterns, Eleanor stopped near a fountain. "I imagine you have many questions about the veil," she said straightforwardly. "I admit I do," Ethan replied, appreciating her directness. "It's a personal choice," she explained, lightly touching the fabric. "It's not permanent, if that's what concerns you, but it's important to me, for now." "Why?" Eleanor turned to him, and even through the veil, he felt the intensity of her gaze. "Because it allows me to be known for who I am, not for what I appear to be. You more than anyone should understand that, Ethan Montgomery." How so? You've built a perfect public image, the successful businessman, always in control. But, if we look closely, you also wear a kind of veil, don't you? The observation struck him like lightning. It was true. His pose as a ruthless executive, his skepticism about love, all of it was a form of protection. Our parents may have arranged this meeting, Eleanor continued, but we don't have to pretend it's something it's not. We can be honest with each other. And what do you suggest? A parallel agreement between us separate from theirs. Let's get to know each other truly, without pressure, without expectations. If it doesn't work out, at least we'll have been honest. Ethan studied the figure before him, fascinated by the mix of mystery and frankness. And if it does work out? Then we'll have built something real, not just a business arrangement. The sound of the fountain filled the silence between them. Ethan realized that for the first time in a long while, he was genuinely intrigued by someone. "I accept your proposal," he finally said, "with one condition." "What is it?" "That you promise me that one day when you trust me, you'll tell me the real story behind the veil." Eleanor was silent for a moment, then extended her hand. "We have a deal then." When they returned to the table, something had changed. The parents continued discussing mergers and acquisitions, but Ethan barely listened. His attention was entirely focused on the mysterious woman by his side, who had just turned his world upside down with a few sincere words and a navy blue veil. At the end of the evening, as he watched the Andersons' car drive away, Ethan received a message on his phone. "It was a pleasure to truly meet you, Ethan." For the first time in years, he genuinely smiled at a text message. Perhaps his father was right. Sometimes the best things in life really do come wrapped in unexpected ways. In the week following the dinner, Ethan found himself constantly checking his phone. The messages exchanged with Eleanor had become surprisingly frequent and deep. She had a unique way of seeing the world, always offering perspectives he would never have considered. "Mr. Montgomery, your 2 p.m. meeting is confirmed." Megan interrupted his thoughts, entering his office with a stack of documents. "And this arrived for you." She placed an elegant cream-colored envelope on his desk, sealed with red wax. Ethan immediately recognized the Anderson crest. Inside, he found a handwritten invitation. "Dear Ethan, how about getting to know my world? I'm organizing a contemporary art benefit at the Art Institute of Chicago this Saturday. Come as my special guest. I promise it will be more interesting than financial spreadsheets. Eleanor." A post-it was stuck to the invitation. "P.S. Dress. Code? Basic black. No blue ties this time." Ethan smiled, remembering how she had teased his predictable tie choice at dinner. "Megan, rearrange my schedule for Saturday." On the day of the event, the Art Institute of Chicago was transformed. Contemporary art installations occupied the space usually reserved for classical works. Ethan arrived promptly at 8 p.m., wearing an impeccable black suit with a burgundy tie, a small rebellion against Eleanor's instructions. She was waiting for him at the top of the staircase, wearing an elegant black dress that flowed like water around her body. The veil this time was more elaborate, with small lace details that shimmered under the museum lights. "You disobeyed my instructions about the tie," she commented, approaching him. "I thought you might appreciate a bit of rebellion," he replied, noticing how she seemed more relaxed than at dinner. "Come, I want to show you something." Eleanor guided him through the exhibition, stopping in front of a particular installation, a maze of mirrors with words engraved on each surface. "What? Do you see?" she asked, standing beside him. Ethan observed their multiplied reflections in the mirrors. "I see. Fragments. Parts of ourselves reflected infinitely." "Interesting," Eleanor murmured. "Most people talk about the disorientation, the confusion. You went straight to the essence." "And what is the essence?" "That we are all made up of multiple reflections, multiple truths. What we show the world is just one of the infinite possibilities of who we are." As they walked through the exhibition, Eleanor explained each piece with contagious passion. Ethan discovered that she wasn't just an art enthusiast, but also one of the curators of the event. "How do you see so much beauty in things that seem so chaotic?" he asked, observing an abstract sculpture. Perhaps because I've learned that beauty isn't always on the surface, she replied, lightly touching her veil. Sometimes you have to look beyond the obvious to find the extraordinary. The evening progressed, and Ethan found himself genuinely interested not just in the artworks, but in the stories behind them. Eleanor had a gift for storytelling, turning each piece into a window to a new world. During a quieter moment, they found an isolated bench overlooking Michigan Avenue. "Why art?" Ethan asked. "With your background in business and law, you could be managing companies." Eleanor was silent for a moment, her fingers playing with the edge of her veil. "Art saved me during a difficult time in my life. It taught me that there is beauty, even in imperfections, in the scars life leaves us." It was the first time she had mentioned something so personal. Ethan resisted the urge to ask more, respecting her pace. "Do you know what I love most about contemporary art?" she continued. "It doesn't try to be perfect. It embraces its irregularities, its contradictions, as we should." "You always speak in metaphors," he observed. "And you always try to translate everything into numbers and concrete facts," she countered, laughing softly. "Maybe that's why our parents thought we'd be a good match. Balance." A waiter passed by offering champagne, and Ethan noticed how Helena had a particular method for drinking. She discreetly lifted one side of her veil, just enough to bring the glass to her lips. "That must be challenging," he commented, unable to hold back. "The veil? Yes, sometimes. But it has taught me a lot about adaptation, about finding different ways to do ordinary things." She turned to him. "How would you adapt your management methods if you suddenly lost access to all your financial reports?" The question caught him off guard. "I would have to rely more on intuition, on people." "Exactly. Sometimes our limitations force us to develop other senses, other skills." The conversation was interrupted by a group of guests who wanted to speak with Eleanor about the artworks. Ethan watched her interact with them, noticing how magnetic her presence was, even with her face covered, or perhaps he thought, precisely because of it. At the end of the night, as they waited for their cars at the valet, Eleanor turned to him. "You survived an entire evening of contemporary art, and surprisingly enjoyed it," he admitted. "You're a great teacher, and you're a better student than you think." She hesitated for a moment. "Next week, there's a green tech fair in Chicago. I imagine it's more your territory. Would you like to return the favor and be my guide?" Ethan felt a smile forming on his lips. It would be an honor. When her car arrived, Eleanor said goodbye with a light touch on his arm. "Thank you for being open to new experiences, Ethan." Driving home, he realized that for the first time in years he hadn't checked his emails or made a single work call during a social event. Somehow, Eleanor had managed to make him completely forget about the outside world for a few hours. And the most surprising part, he had barely thought about what was behind the veil all night. Somehow the mystery was becoming part of the charm. The McCormick place was unrecognizable, transformed into an oasis of green innovation. Solar panels adorned the roofs, and prototypes of electric cars gleamed under low-energy LED lights. Ethan waited at the VIP entrance, nervously checking his watch. "Anxious?" Eleanor's voice surprised him. Today she wore a beige-tailored suit and a lighter veil, almost golden in the morning light. "Actually, yes," he admitted. "It's the first time I'm playing the role of guide for someone who probably knows more about the subject than she lets on." Eleanor laughed, a crystalline sound he was beginning to appreciate more and more. "I promise to be a diligent student, but first I need to show you something." She led him to a discreet booth in the corner of the main pavilion. The banner displayed the logo of Anderson Renewables, and in the center was a device that looked like a mix of modern sculpture and cutting-edge technology. "This is the project I developed in Portugal," Eleanor explained, her eyes shining through the veil. "A solar energy capture system that adapts to weather conditions in real time, maximizing efficiency even on cloudy days." Ethan examined the equipment with genuine interest. "This could revolutionize our project in the Northeast." "Exactly why I wanted to show you," she smiled. "I thought we could start our own partnership, independent of our parents' plans." The proposal caught him off guard, not because of the idea itself, which made perfect sense from a business perspective, but because of how effortlessly Eleanor blended business and personal matters. They spent the next few hours exploring the fair, with Ethan explaining the latest innovations in clean energy and Eleanor offering surprising insights into each technology. At one point, they stopped at a sustainable cafe set up in the middle of the event. "How do you do it?" Ethan asked, watching her skillfully handle the coffee cup through the veil. "What? Drink coffee without making a mess," she joked. "Practice. Lots of practice." "Not just that. How do you manage to be so adaptable? You've turned something that could be a limitation into a kind of superpower." Eleanor set down her cup, thoughtful. "You know when you're in a dark room and gradually your eyes adjust and you start to see shapes you couldn't before? It's kind of like that. When we lose access to something we take for granted, other senses sharpen." "What did you lose?" The question slipped out before he could stop himself. The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. "I lost the illusion that appearances matter," she finally replied. "But I gained so much more in return." Before Ethan could delve deeper into the subject, they were interrupted by a group of Japanese executives interested in Eleanor's project. She began explaining the technical details in fluent Japanese, much to Ethan's astonishment. "Any more surprises I should know about?" he asked when they were alone again. "A few," she replied with an amused tone. "But where would the fun be in revealing everything at once?" They continued their tour of the fair, but now the dynamic had subtly shifted. Ethan began to notice how other business people looked at Eleanor, some with curiosity, others with thinly veiled prejudice, but she navigated every situation with a dignity that impressed him. By late afternoon, they stopped at a virtual reality booth simulating the impact of climate change in different scenarios. "Would you like to try?" offered the presenter, handing over the VR glasses. Eleanor hesitated for the first time that day. "I don't know if—" "I'll help," Ethan instinctively offered, sensing her dilemma with the veil. Carefully, he guided her to the demo area. "Close your eyes," he whispered, and with a gentleness he didn't know he possessed, he adjusted the glasses over the veil, making sure nothing was displaced. The moment of trust between them didn't go unnoticed. Eleanor allowed him to guide her through the virtual experience, their hands lightly intertwined as she explored a digital world of sustainable possibilities. "That was intense," she commented afterward as he helped her remove the glasses, with the same care. "Thank you for the understanding. It's the least I can do considering how much you've been teaching me." On their way to the exit, Eleanor stopped abruptly. "Ethan, about our partnership. I don't want you to agree just because it's convenient for the companies." "What if I said I'm more interested in the partner than the project?" The words came out before he could filter them. Eleanor turned to him, and even through the veil he could feel the intensity of her gaze. "Then I'd say we're starting to speak the same language." When they said goodbye in the parking lot, there was a new energy between them. It wasn't just the possibility of a successful business partnership, but something deeper, more personal. "Dinner tomorrow," he proposed. "I know a place with amazing food and discreet lighting." "You're learning," she smiled, lightly touching his arm. "I accept on one condition." "What's that?" "That you wear that blue tie I banned. I like it when you challenge me." As he watched her car drive away, Ethan realized he was smiling. Eleanor had turned a simple tech fair into something far more meaningful. And the most interesting part, the veil that once intrigued him so much now seemed like just a detail amidst everything she was. The Ivy, tucked away on a quiet street in Lincoln Park, was known for its intimate atmosphere and innovative cuisine. Ethan arrived first, nervously adjusting the blue tie Eleanor had banned. The maître d' led him to a discreet table, partially hidden by decorative screens. Minutes later, Eleanor arrived. Her simple black dress contrasted with an elaborate veil embroidered with tiny dots that sparkled like stars in the restaurant's soft lighting. "You really wore the tie," she commented, sitting down. "You said you liked it when I challenged you," he replied with a smile. The sommelier approached, presenting the wine list. Eleanor hesitated for a moment, then turned to Ethan. "How about a little experiment? Choose the wine for both of us, but don't tell me what it is." Intrigued, Ethan selected a complex Pinot Noir. When the glasses were served, Eleanor raised hers. "Let's toast to new experiences," she proposed, "and to the courage to face them." Watching her taste the wine was fascinating. Eleanor closed. Her eyes, or at least Ethan assumed she did by the movement of her veil, and deeply inhaled the aroma. Fruity, with notes of cherry and a touch of oak, she murmured. "Pinot Noir, I'd say. Perhaps from Burgundy?" Ethan was impressed. "How did you—" "When we can't fully rely on sight, other senses sharpen," she explained. "Smell and taste become much more important." The dinner continued with a series of surprising dishes. The chef, aware of Eleanor's special condition, prepared each course in a way that could be appreciated not just for its flavor, but for its textures and aromas. Between bites, the conversation flowed naturally, shifting from business to more personal matters. "Tell me about your childhood," Eleanor requested. "What was it like growing up as the heir to the Montgomery Empire?" Ethan hesitated. Normally he avoided talking about his past, but something about Eleanor made him want to open up. "It wasn't always easy," he admitted. "There was a lot of pressure, a lot of expectations. My father, well, he always expected me to be a younger version of him." "And that bothered you?" "Very much. I wanted to prove my worth on my own, not just because of the family name." He paused, playing with the napkin. "I think that's why I became so focused on results, on numbers. It was a way to show my value objectively." Eleanor reached out, lightly touching his hand. "And in the process, you forgot to value other things, beyond numbers." Her touch, even through the thin fabric of her gloves, sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. It was the first time they had made such direct physical contact. "And you?" he asked, trying to maintain his composure. "What was your childhood like in Portugal?" Eleanor withdrew her hand, her tone shifting subtly. "It was complicated. Let's just say I learned early that people aren't always what they seem." There was something in her voice that suggested a deeper, perhaps painful story. Ethan resisted the urge to press for more details. "Is that why you came back to Chicago?" he asked gently. "Partly," she replied, "but also because I felt it was time to face some ghosts from the past." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotion. Ethan realized that, for the first time in a long while, he was genuinely interested in getting to know someone beyond the surface. When dessert arrived, an elaborate construction of chocolate and red berries, Eleanor laughed softly. "What is it?" Ethan asked. "I'm imagining the scene I'll make trying to eat this without getting completely messy," she explained. Ethan had a sudden idea. Picking up his napkin, he folded it carefully. "May I?" Eleanor nodded, curious. Gently, Ethan placed the napkin over his own eyes, tying it behind his head. "What are you doing?" she asked, surprise evident in her voice. "Leveling the playing field," he replied. "Now we're both blindfolded." Her laughter was music to his ears. "Ethan Montgomery, you continue to surprise me." The rest of the dinner turned into a unique experience. Both navigated the dessert using only touch and taste, laughing at the small accidents and discoveries. When they finally removed their improvised veils, the look they exchanged was charged with a new intimacy. "Thank you," Eleanor said softly, "for trying to understand my world." "Thank you for showing me that there's more to life than spreadsheets and reports," he replied. As they left the restaurant, the night was clear and starry. Eleanor looked up at the sky, her veil shimmering under the moonlight. "You know," she began, "there's an interactive art exhibition next weekend. The theme is Altered Perceptions. Would you like to go with me?" Ethan smiled. "Only if you promise to guide me through it blindfolded." "Deal," she laughed, extending her hand. When they said goodbye, the gentle kiss Eleanor placed on Ethan's cheek, even through the veil, felt more intimate than any other contact he had ever experienced. Driving home, Ethan realized that, for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about work, goals, or acquisitions. His thoughts were entirely focused on the mysterious woman who, little by little, was breaking down all his defenses. The Museum of Contemporary Art pulsed with a different energy that night. The Altered Perceptions exhibition had transformed the space into a sensory maze, challenging visitors to experience art in unconventional ways. Ethan waited at the entrance, a folded blindfold in his hands. Eleanor arrived promptly, wearing a flowing dress in shades of green and a veil that seemed to change color as she moved. "Ready to see the world through my eyes?" she asked, a smile evident in her voice. "More than you can imagine," Ethan replied, putting on the blindfold. Eleanor linked her arm with his, guiding him into the exhibition. The first room was a soundscape, where different sonic textures created a complex auditory landscape. "What do you hear?" Eleanor whispered close to his ear. Ethan closed his eyes behind the blindfold, focusing. Water, wind through leaves, and something metallic in the background. "Interesting," she murmured. "I hear a city. Cars, distant voices, the clinking of cups in a cafe." They moved on to the next installation. Ethan felt textures beneath, his feet shifting from soft to rough, from cold to warm. "Now use your hands," instructed Eleanor, guiding his hands toward a sculpture. Ethan's fingers explored curves and angles, trying to decipher the shape. "It feels organic, but with geometric elements." "That's how I see the business world," Eleanor commented. "A mix of natural fluidity with rigid structures." As they moved through the exhibition, Ethan found himself increasingly immersed in the experience. Without sight, every touch, smell, and sound took on a new dimension. At one point, they arrived at a space filled with various scents. "Can you identify them?" Eleanor asked. Ethan inhaled deeply. "Wood, leather, and something floral. Jasmine, maybe?" "Close," she laughed softly. "It's lavender." "Interesting. How our olfactory memories can deceive us, isn't it?" The journey continued, with Eleanor describing some visual installations that Ethan couldn't see. Her voice, close and intimate, created vivid images in his mind. At one point in the exhibition, they stopped in front of an interactive installation. "Here," Eleanor guided Ethan's hands, "you need to shape something with clay based solely on what you feel." Ethan began working the malleable material, surprised by how sensitive his fingers seemed. Without realizing it, he started creating a shape that resembled the outline of a veiled face. "What are you making?" Eleanor asked, curiosity evident in her voice. "I'm not sure," Ethan admitted. "I'm just feeling." When he finished, Eleanor fell silent for a long moment. "It's impressive," she finally said, her voice heavy with emotion. "What is it?" "You've created a face, half covered, half exposed. It's almost like you," Ethan completed softly. The silence that followed was charged with tension and possibilities. Ethan felt Eleanor step closer, her gentle perfume enveloping him. "Ethan," she whispered, "you can remove the blindfold. Now?" Slowly, he took the fabric from his eyes, blinking to adjust to the soft light. The first thing he saw was Eleanor, standing before him, her hands trembling slightly as she touched her own veil. "I want you to see," she said, her voice barely audible. "But I'm afraid." Ethan took a step forward, gently holding her hands. "Eleanor, you don't have to do this. Not for me, not for anyone." She took a deep breath. "It's not for you, it's for me. Because for the first time in a long time, I've found someone who sees me beyond the veil." With a delicate movement, Eleanor began to lift the fabric. Ethan held his breath, his heart racing. Little by little, her face was revealed. Deep green eyes, delicate cheekbones, softly curved lips. And then he saw a thin scar, almost silvery, under the soft light, ran from the corner of her left eye down to her chin. Ethan felt a wave of emotions wash over him. It wasn't pity nor shock. It was a mix of admiration, respect, and something deeper that he couldn't yet name. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You're the first person besides my family to see my face in years." Ethan reached out hesitantly. Eleanor nodded slightly, allowing him to touch her face. His fingers traced the line of the scar gently, not with pity, but with reverence. "Every mark tells a story," he murmured, "and yours must be extraordinary." Eleanor closed her eyes, letting a tear escape. One day I'll tell you everything, but not today. Today I just want to be here, with you, without barriers. In that moment, in the middle of an exhibition, on Altered Perceptions, Ethan felt as if he were truly seeing for the first time. Not just Eleanor, but himself, the world around him. Everything seemed different, more alive, more real. "Thank you," he whispered, "for trusting me." Eleanor smiled, a genuine and radiant smile that made Ethan's heart leap. "Thank you for seeing me, truly." They stood there face to face for a long moment. The world around them seemed to have disappeared. They were no longer the skeptical businessman and the mysterious heiress. They were just Ethan and Eleanor, two human beings discovering a deep and unexpected connection. When they finally left the exhibition, walking hand in hand under the starry sky of Chicago, both knew that something fundamental had changed. The veil had fallen, not just literally, but metaphorically. And what remained was a silent promise of discoveries, challenges, and perhaps something very much like love. The weeks following that night at the museum felt like a dream to Ethan and Eleanor. The connection between them blossomed, fueled by long conversations, shared projects, and moments of intimacy that went far beyond the physical. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, the two walked through Millennium Park. Eleanor, now more confident, wore the veil less often, though she still kept it as a kind of accessory, a reminder of her journey. "You know," Ethan began as they sat by the lake, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm really looking forward to dinner with our families next week." Eleanor smiled, but there was a shadow in her eyes. "Ethan, there's something we need to discuss before that." The seriousness in her voice made Ethan sit up straight. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Remember when I said I came back to Chicago to face some ghosts from the past?" Ethan nodded, gently holding her hand. "The truth is, my return wasn't just a personal decision. It was also a carefully planned strategy by my family." Confused, Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" "Montgomery Enterprises isn't the only company facing difficulties," Eleanor continued, choosing her words carefully. "Anderson Renewables has been under investigation in Europe for alleged irregularities in government. The contracts..." The revelation hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. "But why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I only recently discovered the extent of the problem," she admitted, her voice trembling. "My father. He thought an alliance with the Montgomerys could give us the influence we needed to suppress the investigations here in the US. Ethan stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "So, all of this, us, was just part of a plan?" "No!" Eleanor exclaimed, standing up as well. "What happened between us was real. Ethan, I didn't know all the details when we met. But now that I do, I can't go on without telling you the truth." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with conflicting emotions. Ethan looked out at the lake, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. "Why are you telling me this now?" he finally asked. Eleanor stepped closer, gently touching his arm. "Because what I feel for you is real, and because I believe that together we can find an ethical solution to all of this." Ethan turned to face her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "And what would that solution be?" "Total transparency," she replied without hesitation. "Reveal everything to the authorities, cooperate with the investigations, and rebuild our business practices from the ground up if necessary." The proposal was bold, potentially devastating for both companies in the short term. But there was something in Eleanor's determination that sparked a glimmer of hope in Ethan. "This could ruin our families," he pondered. "Or it could be the chance to rebuild something better, more ethical," Eleanor argued. "Ethan, when I removed my veil for you, it wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a promise of honesty, of facing the truth, no matter how difficult it may be." Ethan watched her, seeing not just the woman he was falling for, but a partner, an ally in what seemed like an impossible challenge. "If we do this," he began slowly, "we'll have to face not only the authorities, but our own families." Eleanor nodded, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "I know. but I'd rather face it with you by my side than continue living a lie. At that moment, by the edge of Millennium Park, Ethan made a decision that would change not only his life, but the future of two powerful business families. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's do it. Together." The relief on Eleanor's face was palpable. She threw herself into his arms, hugging him tightly. "Thank you for believing in me. In us." As he hugged her back, Ethan felt a mix of fear and excitement. The road ahead would be difficult, full of obstacles and potential betrayals. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he was doing something truly meaningful. "So," he said, pulling back slightly to look into her eyes, "what's the next step?" Eleanor smiled, that smile that always made Ethan's heart race. "Dinner with our families, but this time, we'll be the ones setting the rules of the game." As they left the park, hand in hand and with a new purpose, Ethan realized that Eleanor's veil wasn't the only thing that had fallen. The illusions about his world, his family, his own role in society, everything was being challenged, and though the future was uncertain, he couldn't help but feel that with Eleanor by his side, he was finally on the right path. The sun set over Chicago, casting long shadows over the couple. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, difficult confrontations, and decisions that would change the course of their lives. But at that moment, walking side by side, Ethan and Eleanor were ready to face any storm that might come. The Montgomery mansion glowed under the nightlights, a fortress of wealth and power in the heart of the Gold Coast. Ethan adjusted his tie, feeling the weight of the decision he and Eleanor had made. Beside him, Eleanor took a deep breath, her veil now lighter, almost transparent, symbolizing the new era of transparency they intended to usher in. "Ready?" he asked, holding her hand. Eleanor nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of determination and apprehension. "As ready as I can be to turn our lives upside down." As they entered, they were greeted by a chorus of lively voices. The main hall was elegantly decorated, members of the Montgomery and Anderson families mingling in small groups, champagne glasses in hand, discussing what seemed to be a bright future. Richard Montgomery was the first to approach, a triumphant smile on his face. "Ah, finally, the lovebirds have arrived. Come, we have big news to share." Ethan and Eleanor exchanged meaningful glances. That night promised to be even more complicated than they had imagined. Anthony Anderson raised his glass, calling everyone's attention. "Friends, family, we are here to celebrate not only the union of two brilliant young individuals, but also the beginning of a new era for our companies." Murmurs of approval echoed through the hall. Ethan felt Eleanor squeeze his hand, a silent gesture of mutual support. "With the merger of Montgomery Enterprises and Anderson Renewables," Anthony continued, "we will create the largest clean energy conglomerate in Latin America. And of course, we will seal this union with the marriage of Ethan and Eleanor." Applause filled the room. Ethan stepped forward, his firm voice cutting through the celebration. "Actually, we have something important to discuss before any official announcement." Richard's smile faltered for a moment. "Son, I'm sure any concerns can wait. Today is a day of celebration." "No, Dad," Ethan insisted. "This can't wait." Eleanor stood by his side, her presence a source of strength. "Ladies and gentlemen, over the past few months, Ethan and I have discovered irregularities in both companies that cannot be ignored." A tense silence fell over the hall. Anthony Anderson stepped forward, his expression a mask of concern. "Eleanor, dear, what are you talking about?" "We're talking about questionable contracts, Dad," Eleanor replied, her voice trembling slightly. "About investigations in Europe that were swept under the rug. About practices that go against everything we should stand for as leaders in sustainable energy." Richard Montgomery laughed nervously, trying to diffuse the tension. Come on, these are just baseless rumors. Nothing we can't handle with a few phone calls to the right people." "It's exactly that kind of attitude that brought us here," Ethan countered. "We can't keep sweeping problems under the rug. It's time to face the truth and do what's right." The mood in the hall shifted dramatically. Faces that were once smiling now displayed expressions of shock, anger, and fear. Bianca, Ethan's sister, approached, her eyes blazing with fury, Do you have any idea what you're doing? She hissed. Years of work, generations building this legacy, and you want to throw it all away? Eleanor stepped forward, facing Bianca's accusatory gaze. This isn't about throwing away a legacy, but about building a new one, based on ethical principles. Anthony Anderson, his face pale, attempted one last maneuver. Eleanor, my daughter, you don't understand. There are nuances in business that... No, Dad, Eleanor interrupted, removing her veil completely for the first time in public. Surprised, murmurs echoed through the hall at the sight of her scar. There are no nuances when it comes to integrity. I learned that the hard way. Ethan, seeing Eleanor's courage, felt his own resolve strengthen. Starting tomorrow, we will initiate a full audit of both companies. We will cooperate fully with the authorities and restructure our operations transparently. Chaos erupted in the hall. Shouts of protest, accusations of betrayal, and veiled threats filled the air. Richard Montgomery, his face red with anger, grabbed Ethan's arm. You have no authority to make this decision, he bellowed. I will remove you from the presidency immediately. Ethan pulled away, his voice calm but firm. Go ahead, Dad. But know that Eleanor and I will go to the authorities with or without your support. The choice is yours. Be part of the solution or part of the problem. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor and Ethan stood hand in hand, facing the gaze of dozens of people who, until moments ago, had seen them as the future of their business dynasties. Marianne Anderson, Eleanor's mother, was the first to break the silence. With tears in her eyes, she approached her daughter. I knew this day would come, she whispered, gently touching Eleanor's scar. You've always been stronger than all of us. That small gesture seemed to break something in the room. Gradually, voices of support, though hesitant, began to emerge. Longtime employees, younger members of the families, all realizing that this could be the chance for redemption they didn't know they needed. As the night wore on, turning what should have been a celebration into a crisis meeting, Ethan and Eleanor remained united. The path ahead would be difficult, full of legal, financial, and personal obstacles. But there, facing the storm they had unleashed, both knew they had made the right choice. When they finally left the mansion in the early hours of the morning, the sky over Chicago was beginning to lighten. Eleanor looked at Ethan, her eyes shining with a mix of exhaustion and hope. And now, she asked. Ethan smiled, pulling her close. Now, my love, we start rebuilding. Not just our companies, but our lives. Together. The rising sun cast a golden light over the city, promising a new day, a new beginning. And though the future was uncertain, Ethan and Eleanor were ready to face it, without veils, without secrets, just with the truth and each other. The days following the fateful night at the Montgomery mansion were a whirlwind. Ethan and Eleanor barely had time to process the emotional impact of their actions, immersed in a flood of emergency meetings, legal consultations, and interviews. With auditors, on the morning of the third day, they met in Ethan's office, now an improvised bunker against the media storm brewing outside. The first results of the audit are in, Ethan said, passing a folder to Eleanor. His eyes were ringed with deep circles, evidence of sleepless nights. Eleanor flipped through the documents, her face paling with each page turned. It's worse than we imagined, she murmured.